In the first episodes of this series, we explored the collapse of the U.S. Agency for Global Media under a 2025 executive order by President Donald Trump. The decision gutted Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, two outlets long trusted for delivering uncensored news to countries under authoritarian rule. The impact was swift and devastating. Journalists lost their jobs, legal protection, and in some cases, their freedom. As Myanmar plunged deeper into civil war and other authoritarian regimes gained around, the void left by credible foreign media widened into what many now call, quote, information black holes. In episode 2, we brought the conversation closer to home, examining the paradox of Taiwan's media environment. Despite ranking highest in press freedom across Asia, Taiwan grapples with low public trust, political polarization, and lack of strong independent media institutions. We also examined broader press challenges across the region, from media crackdowns in Hong Kong and Bangladesh to the fragility of public trust in South Korea and Malaysia. Across these cases, one theme was clear. The ability to access independent, trustworthy journalism is under siege, not just from censors, but from within media systems themselves. Hi, you're listening to Beyond the Reefs, a show produced by Radio Taiwan International. Here we talk about socioeconomic issues that are faced by Taiwan and their broader impact around the world beyond the reefs of this island nation. If the last decade was defined by the rise of disinformation, then 2025 has marked a decisive shift in the global information order, with governments across the world either retreating from press freedom or weaponizing the media. Journalism now sits at a historic crossroads. The Asia-Pacific region is, of course, no exception. In fact, it may be ground zero. The World Press Freedom Index 2025 tells a sobering story. While Taiwan ranks 24th globally, other regional democracies are backsliding. South Korea fell 15 places in a single year following an episode of martial law and media intimidation. Malaysia plunged from 34 to 107th, fueled by political interference and censorship. And in Myanmar, most independent journalists now operate from exile, if they're not already imprisoned. Yet the threats to journalism aren't always overt. In places like Taiwan, the concern isn't government censorship, but the slow erosion of trust and the concentration of media ownership. A 2024 Reuters Institute Digital News report found that only 28% of Taiwanese people actually trust the news most of the time, one of the lowest trust ratings in Asia. By contrast, Finland, for example, reports 69% in trust of its media, while the US lingers around 32% and the UK at 33%. These trust gaps are shaped by structural imbalances. In Asia, corporate media giants often align with political factions, making impartial reporting a rare commodity. Public broadcasters, tasked with representing all citizens, are typically underfunded and struggle to compete in visibility. Taiwan's public television services, PTS, for instance, receives only about 8 to 9% of the funding that South Korea's public broadcasters receive, despite serving a population half the size. Without strong and independent public broadcasting system, democratic societies leave themselves vulnerable to manipulation. In authoritarian states, the strategy is more blunt. Arrests, shutdowns, and intimidation are routine. According to Reporters Without Borders, over 350 journalists in Bangladesh were harassed or charged in the past year alone. In Hong Kong, the national security law effectively criminalized dissent in the newsroom. Once thriving publications like Apple Daily are gone, and their founders face life sentences. The consequences extend far beyond national borders. As traditional models of journalism collapse, a dangerous vacuum emerges, one increasingly filled by misinformation, propaganda, and content farms disguised as newsrooms. A 2023 Oxford Internet Institute research found that over 75% of disinformation campaigns in Asia were domestically generated rather than foreign influenced, reflecting how deeply polarized and fragmented the information space has become. Against this backdrop, the future of journalism deepens on two parallel strategies. One, rebuilding structural integrity, and two, empowering individual journalists, especially in the next generation. The digital revolution offers a challenge and an opportunity. On one hand, social media platforms have become the primary source of news for a younger audience in Asia. On the other, the very algorithms that prioritize engagement often amplify outrage and conspiracy over verified information. In countries like the Philippines and Indonesia, entire elections have been shaped by viral falsehoods. Yet, these same tools can be repurposed. Niche media startups are proving that it's possible to run low-cost, independent platforms targeting specific communities, fueled by memberships or small donations. The key is credibility. And so, in the spirit of looking forward, we turn to someone who has spent his career on the front lines of this evolution. From cultural diplomacy to investigative advocacy, from France to Southeast Asia, our next guest has been the media landscape transformed from every angle. And this is our third conversation with Cedric Alviani, the Asia Pacific Bureau Director of Reporters Without Borders. He leads RSF's operations across East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania from his office in Taipei, where he works to support exiled journalists, expose censorship, and promote journalistic integrity in the region for the last 25 years. And so our next question for Cedric is, with the legacy media organizations obviously experiencing difficulties with unbiased news source and free press, how do we resolve these sorts of issues?
Well, that's why certifications like JTI could be used, because it is not healthy that governments would decide what is a good media or a bad media. It is not healthy too that platforms would decide what is a good media and a bad media. So with the JTI certification, media outlets actually decide themselves to join a whitelist of good media. This is totally independent. This is certified by professional certification organizations. So this is totally transparent and totally clean. And after we have this whitelist, then governments and platforms can use it to make discrimination. It is perfectly understandable for the public that government would use public money to support media outlets that have made the effort of being transparent and not others. So if Taiwan had any resource to provide to independent media that want to strengthen the respect of ethics, Taiwan could perfectly do it on the basis of the JTI certification, because this is independent. Yeah. Nobody could reproach them from doing this.
I agree. So Taiwanese media could definitely actively seek out third-party certifications from media partners. And so this takes us actually full circle to when we started with the Trump administration dismantling USAGM, what are some of its impacts on countries like Taiwan or regions like Asia? This is one of them. When you take out these third-party media partners, then Taiwan has fewer certification checks and balances to rely on for unbiased information.
Yes, of course. We need more independent media. This is absolutely capital for democracy to properly function. Yeah. And I believe it's very important for the public to stop thinking in terms of blue media, green media, red media, but to consider that media should be at the public service. Media should be imparting factual information. Yes, there can be separate political comments. There can be op-eds, there can be editorials, clearly mentioned as op-eds or editorial. There can be advertising, clearly mentioned as advertising. But journalistic content should be imparting facts and also imparting the background of the facts. You know that in Taiwan, the age pyramid of journalism is extremely unbalanced. You've got a lot of very young journalists joining media outlets, working for a few years and then leaving because they found a better job somewhere else. This is very unbalanced, and this does
somewhere else in a different industry.
Yes,
Oh,
in a different
leaving the
industry,
media industry entirely.
leaving the media industry, and this makes it that they don't have time to build all the background to be able and properly analyze the stories and not only report on what is said in press conferences, but also put things in perspective with what happened in the past. And this is very dangerous because this makes it very difficult for media outlets to provide something else than only breaking news. And without background, the breaking news is not understandable by the public.
Yeah.
So the work of journalists is also to provide this background, but it has to be an honest explanation of the background, of course. This part also cannot be done in a biased manner. Another difficulty with this age pyramid unbalance is that new and young reporters are much more easily pressured by their management, so that they would disregard ethical questions, so that they would accept changes in their articles and so on. So this is also one reason why after a couple of years they leave the profession, because they have the feeling that what they do does not reflect what they expected they would do when they graduated from news department. So really there is a lot to do in Taiwan, and I would say it would be a big mistake from the Taiwanese government and parliament to overlook this problem.
I would say on that front, about young people and young journalists, this has a lot to do with Taiwan and really China and the whole Asia legacy of our educational problems as well. A lot of times seniorities trump talent, right? And that seems to be a systematic problem that we need to address somehow socially.
I just wanted to add one thing. What I just said, it doesn't mean Taiwan does not have talent.
No,
because
we're not saying that.
Taiwan has great journalism universities. When students graduate, they dream of being a Pulitzer Prize, just like every young journalist in the work. The problem is that when they start working, well, they need a job, they need to feed their family, they need to pay the rent, and they don't have so much choice, because except for a few public media outlets which don't have so much fundings and a few independent small media outlets which don't recruit much, the only place they can work is in these big mainstream private media outlets, and they work under such a level of pressure to produce more contents, make more clicks, pressure to make sensationalistic contents, pressure to follow up the political line of the media outlets. It's not surprising that after a few years they would be disgusted and they would look for another kind of job in the private sector in which they would have better salary and less pressure. So I want to say the problem is the system, is not the people, because Taiwan has great journalists, but unfortunately they do not find a way to express themselves and to properly change the situation.
Yeah, you said it very well, much better than I just put it. And so on that note, a final question for you, Cedric, is a final message to these young aspiring journalists. Today in Taiwan, we're talking about legacy media and the pressure they exert on younger journalists to have more clicks, to generate more revenue. At the same time, the journalists are also dealing with a more unstable geopolitical region here in Asia. There actually can be active danger when they go out and report. So what would you say to these kids or young college graduates who are just entering the workforce, entering the field? What guidance would you give them today as someone who's been in the field for so many years?
Well, the situation is not entirely grim, and there is still a silver lining, which is that the current technology allows one person or one very small group of persons to create a media. It wasn't the case in the past. In the past, in order to create a TV station or a radio station, you needed huge investment, or even a printed media, you needed press, you needed huge investment. This investment had to come from another industry. That meant immediate pressure on your editorial line. Nowadays, you can start a TV station or a radio station or your YouTube channel with very small investment. And we have seen some examples of media outlets. I would mention The Reporter in Taiwan. I would mention Hong Kong Free Press in Hong Kong, where the situation is much harder in terms of political pressure. We have seen these media blooming, starting very small, but soon becoming very important in the media landscape of their countries. So I would say you can give a try. Of course, this is not easy, but this is something that couldn't exist before. Before, in order to create and control a media, you had to have huge investment, and this already made you biased. You had to rely on huge advertising, and this brought pressure on your media outlets. You had to have political connections, which brought more pressures. So I would say since the media outlets exist, they've always been very costful, and they've always been threatened by a lot of pressure. And nowadays, because of the technology makes it much lighter, there is the possibility to even register a media outlet as a non-profit organization, so that never you could be bought, purchased, or your editorial line would change. So it is possible. And I would encourage these young journalists to gather together and look for ways to create independent media outlets. That, of course, wouldn't be huge, would cater to a specific targeted audience, but if you multiply the niche media outlet, this can cater to a huge public. So I believe this is the silver lining that technology is bringing, and I believe within a few decades, it might actually be the future of media outlets. Because when you think of what was a newspaper before the internet, there was a lot of entertainment, TV programs, games, a lot of information that now are directly being brought to the public by platforms. So actually, what can media outlets focus on? What is really interesting for the public? Investigations, what politicians are hiding, what corporations are hiding. So actually, the role of media somehow has to refocus on the core mission of uncovering hidden information and bringing it to the attention of the public. And this is not only for politics, this is for environment, this is for economy, this is for industry, this is for social issues, this is for almost everything. There is space for many more niche media that would particularly address these issues. And I believe this is actually a hope for the younger generation, because this is something that they can grab.
Very well said. Grassroots level of media, in fact, might be the way forward, and take advantage, leverage your power with Web 2 or Web 3 technology. So yeah, there is a silver lining in this. And Cedric Alviani, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, that marks the third conversation and the end to this series of our conversation with Cedric Alviani of Reporters Without Borders, based here in Taipei, Taiwan. Ethical journalism is finding new forms, smaller, more fragile, but more community-rooted. We've heard about the challenges, we've unpacked its consequences, and now as we ask ourselves to one conclusion, what kind of media future do we want to build, and who will be bold enough to build it? Thank you for listening to Beyond the Reefs. I'm Joey. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and support journalism that dares to dig deeper.
White sands, gentle ocean breeze, turquoise waters, and strict media censorship. Many countries are a paradise for tourists, but a living hell for journalists. Discover the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index 2025 on rsf.org. Warning, once you know the truth, you may want to rethink your travel plans.